like to begin with a discussion of the Molad, the new moon, what it means, what happens every month, what happened when there was a Beis Hamikdash and a Sanhedrin, as is discussed in the Gemara Rosh Hashanah, as well as the cheshbon, the calculation that we use today in order to determine the calendar. As is well known, the moon rotates around the earth. When there's a full moon, you're actually looking at the sun that's shining on the moon, and you look up in the night sky, there's no sunlight, but you see the sunlight shining on the moon. The moon then rotates around the earth, and it gets smaller and smaller until it's totally invisible, because at a certain point in time, it's between the sun and the earth. And at that moment, it actually ends the light of the previous month, and then they're directly aligned. And then, technically a split second later, there's new light from the new moon. In reality, you can't really see it. It takes several hours to actually see that light. But in theory, it goes from a little light to no light to a little light. That moment, that split second where it sort of crosses the finish line, is known as the Molad. When there was Beis Hamikdash, and even after the Churban Bayis Sheni until the year 359, Chazal were Mekadesh al pi Re'iyah, which means Eidim, as is discussed extensively in Rosh Hashanah, Eidim would come at the sighting of the new moon. They would come to the Beis Din, and the Beis Din would do Trisha v'Chakira with the Eidim, make sure they saw the moon, make sure they're telling the truth. At that point, when they were satisfied with the testimony of these Eidim, they would then declare the new month, Mekudesh, Mekudesh, Mekudesh. In the year 359 of the Common Era, 4119, calculating in the Hebrew year, Hillel HaSheni established a calendar al pi cheshbon, and he was Mekadesh all the months up until Mashiach. And they wanted to mirror what would be if there'd be a Sanhedrin. If they would have Eidim that would see the new moon, we're trying to replicate what would happen. Now, of course, it's impossible to be precise because you don't know, precise meaning exactly every month, to know exactly what would have happened had there been Eidim, but they tried to establish the calendar in a way that would be similar to if there would be a Sanhedrin. And in doing so, the most important number in use was the Shas HaMolad. The Molad is the moment of the new moon that occurs, and that's going to help us determine when Rosh Hashanah is. Now, one important point of the Molad of this time, which we'll speak about in a moment, is that it's an average. The Gemara on Daf Chafei Aleph tells us, Rosh Hashanah Amar Lohem Rabbi Gamliel, Kach mekublani mi beis Avi Abba, Ein chidusha shalavana pachaisa me esrim v'tisha yoim umechza. Between one Molad and the next is not less than 29 days, umechza and a half a day, Ushnei Shlishi Shah, and 2/3 of an hour, Va'ayin Gimel Chalakim, and 73 Chalakim. So what does that mean? 29 and a half days is 29 days and 12 hours. 2/3 of an hour is 40 minutes. And Va'ayin Gimel Chalakim is 73 Chalakim, which comes out to an additional 4 minutes and 1 chelik, 3 1/3 seconds. A chelik is equal to 3 1/3 seconds. We're going to elaborate on that in a moment. But what, again, Rabbi Gamliel is saying is that between one Molad and the next takes 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and 3 1/3 seconds. And this is going to be the basis of the cheshbon of the calendar. Between one month and the next, between one Molad and the next, is going to be this distance of time. Now, it's important to know that this number of 29 days, 12 hours is an average. Different months will have a different length between one Molad and the next. In fact, the Molad could be even up to 16 hours different than the actual time of the new moon. If you look in an almanac, you will see the time of the new moon, and you look at it, and you look at the Molad, and you'll see that's different. Of course, the Molad time given is the time it is in Yerushalayim. So the Molad occurs at one given moment universally. It's when the earth, the moon, and the sun are directly aligned with each other. The time, when we say the time of the Molad, we mean what time is it in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh. And this is the Shas HaMolad, and this is the basis of the calendar. But again, Chazal chose for the Cheshbon an average. And this average is again 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and a chelik. I want to talk a little bit more about this Shas HaMolad. First of all, what is a chelik? A chelik, there are 1,080 chalakim in an hour, which means there are 18 chalakim in a minute. Every month, they announce the Molad of the upcoming month. Every Shabbos Mevarchim. So, for example, this past Shabbos Mevarchim was Shabbos Mevarchim Cheshvan, Shabbos Mevarchim Mar Cheshvan, and their Molad was on Wednesday, which was also Rosh Chodesh. It was 12:10 p.m. and 12 chalakim. The next month, Shabbos Mevarchim Kislev, Habolim Al Kol Yisroel L'Toiva. When we announce that on Shabbos Mevarchim, we're going to announce the Molad will be on Friday at 12:55 a.m. and 13 chalakim. Note, every month it's bumped up by one chelik. The Molad of Teves will be at a certain time and 14 chalakim. Shvat will be 15 chalakim. Other Rishon will be 16. Other Sheni will be 17 chalakim. Nisan will be 0 chalakim. The Molad of Nisan will be on Friday, Erev Rosh Chodesh at 4:36 p.m. No chalakim. Why are there no chalakim? The answer is if we move it up a chelik every month, in other words, it's 29 days later, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and one chelik, so the next month will be a certain time and 2 chalakim, then 3 chalakim, then 4 chalakim. When you reach 17 chalakim, the next month is 18 chalakim. 18 chalakim is a full minute, because 18 times 3 1/3, each chelik is 3 1/3 seconds, is equal to 60, so it's 60 seconds. So what happens is the Molad column goes back to 0, and we add a minute to the minute column because we've completed an entire minute. So Nisan is going to be 0 chalakim, and then again we'll have 0 chalakim minutes, 4:36, and 0 chalakim minutes, and then we have 5:20 a.m. Ear will be 5:20 a.m. 1 chelik, 2 chalakim, 3 chalakim, and so on. It's interesting to note that the Molad will hit all parts of the hour, will hit every part of the chelik over the course of 1,080 months, which is 87 years and either 4 or 5 months. When they announced the Molad of Cheshvan, Tafshin Samachay, 2004, it was actually 0 minutes and 0 chalakim. The next time that'll happen, Habolim Al Kol Yisroel L'Toiva, will be 87 years later. It will be in the year 2092. Because again, every 87 years, the Molad actually goes back to the top of the hour because, again, it hits every possible moment of the given hour because you're adding a chelik, and it hits every one of those chalakim. Anyway, so that's the Shas HaMolad that's there. Now, the Molad is important time because it's going to determine exactly when Rosh Hashanah is going to be. But here we have an understanding of what the Molad is and exactly what occurs. It's when, on average, based on the average time, you have the sun, the moon, and the earth that are all aligned. Now, one more question we have to answer, and that is, if the moon is aligned with the sun and the earth, and it's in between the sun and the earth, and that's why you can't see the moon, you're looking at the dark side of the moon. Actually, the moon also rotates on its axis. It takes the moon 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes, and a chelik for the moon to spin around one time. A day on the moon is the same as, so to speak, the time it takes to go around the earth is the same amount of time it spins on its axis. So we look always at the other side. We're always looking at one side of the moon. Sometimes it's dark, sometimes it's half dark, sometimes it's partially lit. The other side of the moon is always facing away from us until they went up into space and they took pictures of the other side of the moon. We were never able to see it. But even when it was lit up, because it was always facing away from us, that has no practical nafkamina lahalacha. But al-Kapanim, the question is, if the moon is between the sun and the earth, so why isn't it eclipsed? Why doesn't it block the light of the sun? The answer is that we're thinking of the Molad two-dimensionally. We're thinking of the Molad as being directly between the earth and the sun. In reality, it's a little bit higher or a little bit lower. And therefore, every month when the moon goes around the earth and it's directly between the sun and the earth, it's a little bit out of the way. It's a little bit higher or lower. But looking at a bird's eye view, you see it's directly in between the sun and the earth. You have the moon in between, but it could be a little bit higher or lower. Every so often, the earth actually, the moon actually is on the same line as the sun and the earth. They're totally and completely aligned. And that's when we have a solar eclipse. In 2017, 4 years ago, there was a solar eclipse which went all the way from the west coast to the east coast, started in Oregon, made it all the way to the east coast during the course of the day. You will notice that an eclipse always occurs either on Rosh Chodesh or Erev Rosh Chodesh, or maybe 2 days before Rosh Chodesh. The reason for that is because, by definition, Rosh Chodesh is always going to fall out at the period of time when the moon is between the earth and the sun, and that's exactly when an eclipse is going to occur. So the eclipse of 2017 was Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul. You will note that the Molad that they announced on Shabbos, right? The eclipse was on Monday. When they announced the Molad on Shabbos, it wasn't the time of the eclipse. It was much later than the eclipse. The answer is, as we're explaining, the Shas HaMolad is based on the average time it is in Yerushalayim. It was the average amount of time it takes the moon to go around the earth one time. But it's again, the real time. Whenever you have an average, you're not going to get the real time. Typically, you're only going to have an average. Every so often, it will come out on the real time. But that's why the time of the eclipse was different than the Shas HaMolad. But also, the eclipse occurred on Erev Rosh Chodesh because, again, every month the moon is between the earth and the sun. It's just higher or lower. And by an eclipse, which again is scheduled to occur in the United States, visible from the United States, on Erev Rosh Chodesh Nisan 2024, so just in a few years, it's the same thing. It occurs around Rosh Chodesh. In 1979, I remember there was an eclipse in the Northwest. I wasn't there, but there was an eclipse as well that took place, I believe it was on Rosh Chodesh Adar in Telshe in 1979. It was, again, these were total eclipses that occurred. So again, they're always going to occur around Rosh Chodesh. An eclipse of the moon, an eclipse of the moon means the light from the sun is shining on the moon. That's when you look and you see a full moon. At that point in time, the moon is on the opposite side of the earth, and you're looking at a full moon because it's the angle that we see is the entire side of the moon, and therefore you see a full moon. But when the earth blocks that moonlight, so you have a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse will always occur either on the 15th, the Leil the 15th of the month, or the Leil the 14th of the month, or maybe the 13th. Again, for the same reason, because the full moon is when the earth is between the moon and the sun, usually higher or lower, so it doesn't block the light from reaching the moon. But every so often, it actually blocks the light, and therefore you have a lunar eclipse. So to Chazer over, we've seen what a Molad is. We've seen that it occurs every 29 days, 12 hours, 44 minutes. We understand that this is the basis of our calendar, as we will explain in the next session, and that a solar eclipse will always occur around Rosh Chodesh, and a lunar eclipse will always occur around the 15th of the month.